Commander Lyra Van stood on the bridge of her flagship and watched the stars blink out as enemy hulls swallowed the sky. It felt like watching candles go out one by one, a private, aching kind of grief that no report could fix. 3 years into the war with the Karvath Dominion, the Valyrian Republic was nearly spent. 300 Valyrian ships faced over 2,000 Karvath warships, and the numbers mattered in a way that left no room for sentiment. Valyrians built cathedrals of light and painted music into their plazas. They were a people who believed beauty had value that could not be measured in yards of armor or tonnage of ordnance. War, for them, had always been a clumsy lesson, necessary at times, but not something they practiced as a craft. The Karvath practiced war like a language. They had learned its grammar across centuries of conquest. When the Karvath attacked Valyria Prime, those differences were suddenly fatal. Explosions flared on the viewscreen. A cruiser folded apart under plasma fire and 100 souls, gone in an instant. Lyra's officers called out positions, solutions, hope where there was none. The orbital defense platforms fell like brittle teeth. The Karvath would soon begin planetary bombardment, and billions on Valyria Prime would be caught in a rain of engineered fire. She made a decision that felt like surrender but was the only thing she could do, flood the sky with a distress call. No diplomacy, no pretense. A single continuous transmission on every frequency the Republic used. This is Commander Lyra Van of the Valyrian Republic. We are under attack by the Karvath Dominion. Valyria Prime will fall within days. Billions will die. Coordinates attached. We will transmit until our last ship falls. The message went out into the dark, and Lyra felt the same hollow she felt the first night her father failed to come home, a cold, private question, will anyone answer? The galaxy answered, in fits and rehearsed refusals. Replies arrived that read like policy documents translated into sorrow. The Galactic Council called it an internal matter. The Nexari Collective invoked non-interference. The Zephlon Union fretted about retaliation. The polite refusals cut deeper than silence. Lyra catalogued them all, filed them like wounds. Then a different tone. The communications officer straightened, eyes wide. Commander, we've got a response, not like the others. It came from a sector most races overlooked, the Sol system. A species called humans. The message was blunt and unadorned. Received your distress call. United Earth Fleet en route to your coordinates. Hold position and protect your people. Help is coming. Lyra digested the file the Valyrian archive had on humanity. 2 decades of faster-than-light travel. Classed as young, dangerous, a death world origin, Earth's world catalogued as a class 12. The note said it plainly. Their planet was merciless and had forged a species that other civilizations found unsettling. Dense bones. Thick muscles. A history steeped in warfare. Yet the same dossier carried an almost obscene statistic. In 20 years among the stars, humans had engaged in 7 separate conflicts and won them all. Every one. The High Council demanded answers. Can such a young species truly matter against the Karvath? Elder Mira Alesh asked. Lyra read the reports, skirmishes that became routes, systems that learned to fear human tactics. Human ships were described as brutal and efficient, their tactics unpredictable and deadly. Lyra felt a cautious thing she had not allowed herself in 3 years, hope. She chose to believe. The Valyrian fleet could not hold forever. If the United Earth Fleet could not be counted on, the Republic had no other lifeline. She ordered her remaining ships to fight defensively and held her breath. Warlord Krentha's taunt came then, broadcast like a blade. Surrender, he told them, and half might live as slaves. Or refuse, and the Karvath would grind their cities to ash. Lyra answered with what dignity she had left, we will never surrender to butchers. Krenth laughed and the bombardment ships rumbled forward. And then the universe tore. Sensors screamed as impossible distortions opened at the edge of the system, rifts that shredded the conventions of space. From those wounds, ships poured, 400 warships in tight formation, hulls brutal and angular, weapons bristling. The flagship arrived last, the Liberty's Hammer, a 5-kilometer dreadnought whose very silhouette read like a promise. On open channels a voice spoke, steady and human. "This is Admiral Helen Drake of the United Earth Fleet. We received your distress call. We are here. Pull your forces back and let us handle this." For a moment Lyra felt unmoored. How could such a young species appear with such force? The Carveth laughed at the sight. Krent thought 400 ships against his almost 2,000 meant an easy meal. He did not know the language of Deathworld-born strategy. Lyra watched, tense as a thing about to break, as the human fleet accelerated toward them with a kind of terrible, organized fury. Where most fleets drift and parley, the humans advanced. They closed like predators, weapon systems humming, tactics surgical, rail guns, tungsten rounds at relativistic speeds, missiles that behaved like living things, energy beams that cut entire formations. 60 seconds of combat and 90 Carveth vessels were gone. The Carveth plasma that had decimated so many worlds barely troubled the human shields. The human ships absorbed punishment like armor and returned force tenfold. Lyra read through the human battle logs again while watching the slaughter. Humans had not merely adapted to war, they had made it an art. But not for conquest, it seemed, for protection. They had responded to a distress call. The United Earth Fleet had come because they answered. Humanity answers. The Carveth reacted like an old beast surprised to be hurt. Warlord Krent redirected reserves. He had more ships, numbers were the grammar of his confidence. 400 ships, then reinforcements, then a slow, industrial certainty toward annihilation. He offered one last cruelty, bombard the cities below. The Carveth lined up 60 heavy cruisers over Valyria Prime and charged their weapons. The humans did not blink. A subset of their fleet threw themselves between the bombardment vessels and the planet, burning engines to white heat and accepting impacts meant for millions on the surface. Valyrian citizens watched human shields flare and break in orbit and wept, strangers giving themselves to save people they had never met. That act, raw and reckless, changed everything in Lyra's mind. It was proof, not only of capability but of intention. The United Earth Fleet came because they would not look away. Help is coming was more than radio words, it was a covenant. Human tactics were an education for Valyrian officers. They struck command nodes first, severing Carveth coordination. Small, hard destroyers exploited weak arcs, slipping inside the firing envelopes of enormous cruisers and tearing them apart with close-range ferocity. Fighters, piloted fighters, not emotionless drones, danced through anti-air webs and punched holes where no logic suggested holes could exist. Pilots had trained in gravity wells that would have killed most species. They handled maneuvers as though the universe were a playground. Captain Jake Morrison's voice cut across channels, primary targets, command ships and carriers. Cut off the head and the body dies. His tone had the flatness of a man who had given up sleep for years and found it for a single purpose. The human fleet executed with machine precision and human daring. The Carveth attrition mounted quickly. In minutes hundreds of their ships were wreckage. Krentha's seasoned captains, confident in a doctrine that had never failed, found their plans dissolving. Panic spread like a disease. Ships broke formation. The Carveth had never faced an enemy that refused to retreat, that refused to be cowed by numbers. Humans bled, but they did not stop. The Liberty's Hammer issued a cold ultimatum, surrender or be destroyed. Krent answered with defiance. He also answered poorly. Human carriers opened hangar bays and thousands of fighters spilled into the void. Each fighter had a living person at the controls, a pilot whose reflexes and instincts had been sculpted by a brutal planetary origin. Force Lieutenant Sophie Grant and her Valkyries sliced through hangar shields, targeted carrier interiors, and detonated secondary explosions that consumed entire enemy wings. Combat was organized chaos, close-range boarding, long-range annihilation, coordinated interdiction. Valyrian and human tactics meshed like old hands learning a new duet. Lyra's fleet, wounded but intact, rejoined the fray. Human command requested flanking strikes, Valyrian maneuvers applied electronic warfare and jamming while human hammer blows shattered Karvath formations. In 15 minutes combined strikes reduced a snarling 300-ship pocket to silence. Lyra felt something she had not felt in a long time, the memory of victory, not as myth but as present reality. Yet the battle was not without horror. Sensors flagged a group of Karvath heavy cruisers making a separate run on Valyria prime cities. Their weapons charged to planetary bombardment levels. Lieutenant Chris Holland, young and sharp, hollered the numbers, 40 million souls in the targeted cities. Jake Morrison's orders were terse, every ship that could intercept, do so, push engines beyond safe limits. They raced. 40 human ships arrived between the bombardment fleet and the planet, absorbing plasma designed to crack crust and vaporize populations. 3 destroyers breached, their hulls shredded, and yet they held, dying like planted steel to buy a century of life for Valyrian people below. People emerged from shelters and watched the sky, burning human silhouettes stood between them and extinction. The sight became a kind of conversion. What was abstract, sacrifice, alliance, interstellar ethics, became concrete in the faces of those who watched their saviors burn. Then the rest of the United Earth Fleet arrived to finish the job. 200 ships dropped from high speed and tore the bombardment fleet apart. The Karvath who had hoped to rain annihilation on a species were themselves annihilated. Admiral Helen Drake's voice, but now not only cold, incensed, declared no quarter. The Karvath had tried to commit an atrocity, now they would face the consequence. Lyra watched Krentha's empire unravel in real time. 2,000 ships became 1,000, then 500, then a few. When Krentha attempted a final, desperate suicide run, 50 heavy cruisers slamming into the Liberty's hammer, the humans responded with concentrated fire and boarding parties. The impact stuck one Karvath flagship to the Liberty's bow, but Admiral Drake had expected that. Marines in powered armor, veterans of terrestrial rebellions and orbital sieges, cut through smoke and Karvath flesh. Sergeant Kevin Brooks led the boarding action with a clarity that cut through sentiment. He moved like someone who had rehearsed morality in the theater of war, they would capture Krentha alive if possible. When they reached the bridge, the warlord was wounded, defiant, and incredulous. "How is this possible?" he spat, the old arrogance failing him now. Kevin's answer was simple, "You thought young meant weak. You did not learn where we come from. We evolved on a planet that kills everything. We learned to be meaner and tougher. You picked a fight with Deathworlders. That was your last mistake." Krentha was detained. His capture, broadcast across the battlefield, broke the remaining Karvath will. Ships powered down one by one, the survivors surrendered. Out of 2,200 vessels fewer than 100 remained intact. The Karvath Dominion's might, their terror, was shattered in under 6 hours. When the noise settled, Lyra sat with the precise numbers the sensors spat out. The human fleet had lost only 23 ships, mostly small craft, and had evacuated crews wherever possible. The result was statistical absurdity, the meaning was more human. Lyra opened a channel to Admiral Drake, voice shaken. "Admiral, you saved us. We owe you everything." Drake's answer was the same thing she'd done when she first answered, direct and unadorned. "You sent a distress call and we answered. That is what decent people do. That is what allies do." The United Earth Fleet responded. Help is coming when someone calls. The days after the battle smelled of ozone and melted alloys and, beneath that, something rarer, relief. Valyria Prime emerged from the shelters like a species waking from a long nightmare. Millions stepped into sunlight that felt, for the first time in years, like a right and not a reprieve. On the Liberty's hammer, crews patched burns and recorded losses, but their posture was the same as before, there would be more calls and they would answer. Human medics worked alongside Valyrian physicians. Engineers traded schematics. Where the Karvath had sought to erase a culture, the Alliance began the slow, stubborn process of restoration. 3 days after the last Karvath ship powered down, Admiral Helen Drake walked beneath spires that had been dark for years. The Hall of Unity filled with faces, citizens, counselors, children, and Lyra waited on the landing pad, nervous to meet the commander who had saved her world. Helen emerged from her shuttle still bearing scorch marks from the campaign. She was tall, severe, and when she smiled it was not theatrical, it was honest. Elder Mara Solis thanked her in a voice that trembled with recovered hope. Helen's reply was steadier, "We did not come for praise. We came because evil triumphs when the good do nothing. We will not stand by." What passed between human and Valyrian in that Hall of Unity was not merely treaty text. It was a choice. The Treaty of Unity established mutual defense, technology sharing, and cultural exchange. It was modest in wording but seismic in consequence, a Deathworld people and a peaceful republic forging an alliance not of conquest but of guardianship. The Valyrian Council ratified it within hours, and the world celebrated in ways that would become legend. News traveled faster than the battle did. Species that had refused to help now watched the Valyrian skies and re-evaluated the calculus of fear. The Galactic Council shifted in its chairs, discomfort at being shown wrong. Invitations and requests poured into Earth Command, defensive pacts, protection of merchant lanes, help against predatory neighbors asking a single question, will humanity help us too? Lyra asked Sophie Grant a question that had echoed on the bridges since the first human ship arrived: you could dominate the galaxy. Why protect instead of conquer? Sophie walked through a memorial garden and answered simply, because we remember what it's like to be vulnerable. Our history nearly destroyed us. We learned that strength without compassion is tyranny. We fight so others don't have to. Admiral Drake left a permanent garrison, 50 ships to train Valyrian defense forces and to stand as a deterrent. Captain Jake Morrison volunteered to lead the effort, the first human military presence outside the Sol system. It was small in scale but enormous in symbolism. Humanity would not simply pass through other systems, they would remain and help them stand. The Karvath Dominion did not recover. With Krent captured and the fleet shattered, the Empire splintered into factions. Former subjects rebelled, old grievances became flame. Within a year, the Dominion, the same engine of fear that had threatened billions, collapsed into contested sectors and minor warbands. Krent faced trial for war crimes, and human legal advisors helped guide the process to ensure justice, not revenge. The Galactic Council eventually offered humanity a seat, with conditions designed to hem in their influence. Admiral Drake declined. You talk while peaceful species burn, she said. You debate while innocents die. We choose action. Thus, humanity chose to build its own coalition, the Unity Alliance. Within 2 years, 17 species joined under a charter of mutual defense and shared prosperity. It was not an empire, it was a promise. On the 5th anniversary of the Battle of Valyria Prime, a memorial stood where both species placed names, Valyrian defenders, human crew, even Karvath dead, because Admiral Drake insisted that fallen warriors deserved remembrance. A desperate signal crossed the stars, she said at the dedication, and the choice to answer changed history. When someone cries for help, humanity answers. That refrain, humanity answers, became a cultural motif. It was more than propaganda. It was a standard, a call sign. When a new SOS streaked across the comm bands, the United Earth Fleet's reply was steady and simple: United Earth Fleet is en route. Hold your position. Help is coming. Those words, once a radio line on a bridge in Lyra's fleet, became a guarantee that altered calculations across star systems. Valyrian and human children played in gardens beneath the memorial, and scientists from both worlds collaborated on energy and shielding tech that would save lives, not build empires. The Guardian Initiative, a program born out of Valyria's distress and Earth's response, codified both doctrine and resources to answer distress calls from peaceful species. Fleet budgets increased, but so did diplomacy programs, cultural exchange, and joint research. And yet, the story was never fully tidy. Power tempted people, and not everyone welcomed a new guarantee. Some species feared human influence. Old politics shifted. But the proof was on display: a world saved, a warlord captured, a people given a future. The cost had been real, the gain was not dominion but trust. On the Liberty's hammer, Admiral Drake recorded a final log before returning to the Sol system. She spoke plainly: mission accomplished. Valyria Prime is secure. Alliance established. We proved we are not conquerors. We are guardians. Whenever someone cries for help, humanity answers. The galaxy had watched a Deathworld species grow into a guardian force, not by conquering, but by choosing, again and again, to stand between the vulnerable and the violent. And whenever the comms lit up with a cry from the dark, the same message echoed back: United Earth Fleet en route. Hold your position. Help is coming. If you want more slow burn, philosophical sci-fi with a focus on consequence, sacrifice, and what it means when a people become guardians of the innocent, leave a comment and tell me which scene you'd like narrated next. Don't forget to subscribe for the next installment. There's more universe ahead.